As the key slid into the lock, Zheng Wu glanced at his watch. 1:35 a.m. He frowned slightly. The floor lamp glowed faintly, and the fire in the hearth crackled occasionally, casting a warm, cozy light throughout the room. There was even a faint, sweet scent of food lingering in the air. Su Zhou lay on the sofa, still in her clothes, clearly having fallen asleep while waiting for him. Her glossy, dark curls obscured part of her face, and her long lashes cast delicate shadows like little fans on her cheeks. His lips curled up slightly. Quietly, he hung up his briefcase and coat. He rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them before gently lifting her to take her to bed. But as soon as he picked her up, she woke, her cheeks flushed from sleep. Half dazed, she rubbed her eyes and smiled when she saw Zheng Wu. "You're back?" Her eyes curved into crescent moons, but after a pause, she furrowed her brows angrily. "You drank again, didn't you?" Zheng Wu smiled wryly. "We just signed the contract this afternoon." She puffed out her cheeks, kicking her legs as she wriggled free from his arms. "There's fish soup still simmering in the pot. You're not going to bed until you finish it." Zheng Wu laughed at her feisty reaction. Su Zhou took a few steps, but upon hearing his laugh, turned to glare at him. He quickly looked away, but the grin still lingered on his lips. Seeing this, Su Zhou stomped her foot in frustration. "Finish the whole pot. Not a drop left." The ceramic bowl held a rich, creamy fish soup. Since Zheng Wu had a sensitive stomach, Su Zhou had added astragalus and codonopsis to the soup, filling the room with a subtle herbal aroma. Zheng Wu gulped down several bowls, while Su Zhou sat by, watching with a smile as the usually composed Mr. Zheng devoured bowl after bowl like a hungry wolf, all the while praising the soup. Su Zhou, annoyed yet amused, said, "Didn't they feed you at Zheng Corp?" Zheng Wu said nothing, just kept eating. After a while, he looked up. It was a cold banquet, and they served sashimi. Just looking at it made my stomach hurt. With a helpless shrug, he added, "So I had no choice but to drink." Su Zhou was furious, almost speechless with rage. "Zheng Wu, what nonsense is that?" He quickly grinned, trying to defuse her anger. Just kidding. I didn't drink much. I'm too scared to now. What if I drop dead, and you go off and remarry?" Su Zhou huffed in exasperation, but Zheng Wu loved teasing her like this. Outside, he had no choice but to be cautious. As the family's chosen leader, handpicked by his grandfather, he had to be meticulous, constantly on guard, never showing weakness. Every move was calculated, every emotion masked. But at home, he could finally relax. The dinner table was warm and pleasant. Zheng Wu's tie hung loosely around his neck, his usual stern demeanor nowhere in sight. Suddenly, his spoon paused midair, a smile still on his lips. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "I have an 8 a.m. flight to New York tomorrow." Su Zhou froze, then responded with surprising calm. "How long this time?" 2 weeks, if all goes well." The words were harder to say than he expected. Silence. "I'll pack your things," she said, lowering her eyes. "My assistant already packed and put it in the car," he said cautiously. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. They both fell silent. After a long pause, she simply said, "Okay." When she woke up, her head felt heavy, and her body didn't seem rested at all. Zheng Wu was already gone. A sandwich and a glass of milk sat on the table, cold by now. As she stepped outside, she realized it had started snowing again. The world was a snowy wonderland, covered in glittering white. Such heavy snow, yet the flight hadn't been canceled. How unusual. Su Zhou forced herself to stay busy, working through the day in a fog, like a spinning top that couldn't stop. When the phone rang, it took her a moment to realize the sound was coming from her apron pocket. "Hello," she said instinctively, pressing the phone to her ear. "Xiao Su Su, care to join me for dinner?" Came the deep, sultry voice, tinged with mischief. Su Zhou frowned at the name on the caller ID. Zheng Li. She pressed the phone back to her ear. "Master Zheng, do you know what time it is?" she teased, glancing at the clock. To her surprise, it was already past 8 p.m. She had worked the whole day without realizing it. Embarrassed, she stuck out her tongue. No, it's too late. Zheng Li's voice turned stern. Don't tell me you haven't eaten yet. He sounded genuinely displeased. Su Zhou mumbled awkwardly. I kind of did. She didn't dare admit she had forgotten breakfast too. Zheng Li wasn't fooled. He knew she was lying. She always stammered when she did, a habit from their college days. His voice turned angry. Su Zhou, are you out of your mind? Su Zhou quickly pulled the phone away from her ear to avoid his shouting. Before she could explain, Zheng Li had already barked, "Wait there," and hung up abruptly. She stared at the phone in disbelief before finally getting angry. How dare he speak to his sister-in-law like that? At precisely 9 p.m., the cafe was closing. Su Zhou sent the waitstaff home and carefully drew the curtains. She stood by the window for a moment, watching the snow continue to fall. The distant neon lights shimmered through the thick flurries, while New York was 13 hours behind. When she slept, Zheng Wu would be working. When she was busy, Zheng Wu's night was just beginning. It was a rhythm she had forced herself to get used to. With a quiet sigh, she lowered the curtains. Just as she turned, a scream caught in her throat as a stranger, a scruffy man with a full beard, clamped a hand over her mouth. The stench of alcohol hit her instantly. Panic seized her, and she struggled, terror coursing through her as her knees buckled. She let out muffled cries, while the man grinned lasciviously, remnants of vomit stuck in his beard. "Hey, pretty girl, how about a drink?" She tried desperately to escape, but the strength difference between a man and a woman was clear. No matter how hard she fought, she couldn't break free from his grip. The curtains were drawn. No one outside would notice what was happening inside. Tears streamed down her face. If only Zheng Wu were here, but a bitter voice in her head reminded her, even if he were, he'd probably be at some banquet or stuck in his office. The man started to tear at her sweater. Shuddering, Su Zhou fought harder, sobbing uncontrollably. No matter how much strength she used, the man's hold didn't loosen. Desperately, she remembered a self-defense move she'd seen online and aimed a kick at his groin. But she was too close. The kick had little effect, only angering the man further. He grabbed her hair, yanking her painfully before tossing her across the room. She crashed into the bar, hitting her head hard. Dizziness overwhelmed her, warm liquid trickling down her forehead. Suddenly, the door slammed open with a bang. She forced her heavy eyelids open, seeing a tall figure lift the man by the collar. The drunk's legs dangled helplessly in the air. Her vision darkened, and she collapsed. When she woke up, everything around her was blindingly white. She felt disoriented and drowsy, unsure of where she was. When she moved slightly, a sharp pain pierced her forehead, bringing her to her senses. The smell that had been lingering all along was, in fact, a strong disinfectant. Just as she was thinking about it, a tall figure pushed the door open. She squinted, trying to see more clearly, but before she could, the figure rushed to her bedside like a gust of wind. "How are you feeling?" The voice was filled with anxiety. "Zheng Li, what are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse. Zheng Li's expression changed in an instant. "Su Zhou, how could you forget me so easily? If I hadn't been the hero saving the damsel in distress, you would have been in serious trouble." Su Zhou pressed her lips together weakly. Anything that came out of Zheng Li's mouth always lost its charm. Seeing that she didn't respond, Zheng Li's tone softened. "Hungry?" Then, with a grin, he pulled out a thermos from behind his back. As he scooped chicken soup into a bowl, his sharp eyebrows suddenly furrowed. "You're getting better at this, huh? Skipping meals for an entire day." While Su Zhou mentally criticized how a man could switch moods faster than flipping a book, she weakly said, "Master Zheng, if you know I haven't eaten all day, could you please have some mercy on me and give me some soup without the lecture?" She clasped her hands together in a playful, pleading gesture. Zheng Li's lips twitched with amusement, but still, he grumpily raised the head of her bed, pulled over a small table, and adjusted her pillow, all with the utmost care. She was truly hungry, and Zhongli's chicken soup was quite delicious. Just as she was gulping down a couple of spoonfuls, something suddenly occurred to her. "Zhongli, I'm not deaf. You don't need to shout." He shot her a glare. She stared at him, her eyes almost pleading. "Please, don't tell Zhongwu about what happened last night, okay?" Zhongli smiled slightly and even took a sip of water. After a moment of silence, he suddenly raised his voice. "Did you knock your head last night, or do you just not have one? You're not planning to tell the third brother about something this serious? Do you think you can keep it a secret? If you don't tell him, knowing his temper, won't he go ballistic? Do you think I have a death wish? Keep it hidden? Hide an injury? Do you think you can also hide a scar? And what about pregnancy? Do you think you can hide a belly too?" Suzhou was completely stunned by Zhongli's rapid-fire scolding. She muttered under her breath, "Your comparison is off. Being injured isn't the same as being pregnant." But Zhongli heard her. His eyes suddenly widened, and he stared at her like she was an alien. "Grandma Su." He gritted his teeth in frustration, squeezing out each word. "You don't know you're pregnant." Suzhou was beyond eager for Friday to arrive. Zhongwu had called on Wednesday afternoon, just as Suzhou was happily picking out baby bottles at a maternity store. Since finding out she was pregnant, her heart had been brimming with happiness every day. The joy was so overwhelming that she almost wanted to leap and let it overflow. Her phone suddenly rang, and it was an unfamiliar number. "Hello." Even her voice was filled with genuine delight. "It's me." A deep male voice traveled from across the ocean. It was Zhongwu. She squealed in excitement, oblivious to the curious glances from the shop assistants. "Why are you calling now?" She glanced at the time. It was 3 a.m. in New York. "You're staying up late again." Her reprimand was sweet and soft, filled with the happiness of seeing him. On the other end, he laughed, seemingly infected by her good mood. "I'm coming back on Friday." She tried to keep her voice down, but couldn't contain her excitement and let out a sharp, joyful squeal. "You're coming back early? I'll come to the airport to pick you up." He laughed even more. "You stay at home and behave." After hanging up the phone, Suzhou's joy was impossible to hide. She hastily tossed a few items into her shopping basket and rushed to check out. She still had to buy Zhongwu his favorite dishes. Her steps were hurried and light, as though she were flying. On Friday morning, as soon as the sky lightened, Suzhou was already up. She took a bath, changed clothes, and put on light makeup. In front of the mirror, she tied up her waist-length hair, then let it down, tied it up again, and let it down again. Nothing seemed to look right. After repeating this several times, she couldn't help but laugh at herself. She hadn't told him about the pregnancy yet. She couldn't wait to see his surprised expression, usually so calm and collected. They had their first prenatal checkup scheduled for the next day. She imagined the two of them walking into the hospital's obstetrics department together, and the thought made her fall back onto the bed, rolling around in laughter. She was so happy that even her toes wanted to giggle. The soup simmered in the pot, white steam billowing up as she carefully skimmed off the foam with a bamboo strainer and lowered the heat. The ribs had been blanched to remove any scum and were now soaking in a bowl of iced mineral water. The large, fresh bamboo shoots were cleaned and drained, neatly arranged in a sea-green bowl. Suzhou quickly sorted through the baby bok choy, carefully separating the bright green leaves and rinsing them thoroughly in a white porcelain bowl to remove any dirt. She had made a hearty meal of pork rib soup, red braised pork, and eggplant in soy sauce. All the rich, savory dishes Zhongwu craved after coming back from abroad. To avoid overwhelming him, she also prepared a light, refreshing side dish. When all the dishes were laid out on the table, Suzhou glanced at the clock. It was already almost 2 o'clock. She started to worry. Zhongwu had said his flight would land at 11. Just as she was debating whether to call him, her phone rang. Startled, she accidentally touched the hot edge of the pot, wincing from the burn. Ignoring the pain, she hurried toward the sound to find her phone. It was Secretary Sun. It turned out that Zhengwu had been summoned to an emergency board meeting and had to fly to Melbourne. He hadn't even had time to let her know. Secretary Sun could hear the disappointment in her voice. "Mr. Zheng asked me to tell you that he'll be back in no more than 2 weeks. He said not to worry." Another 2 weeks. She smiled bitterly and glanced at the bountiful table of food. "I'll pack some cool clothes for him. Please take them with you." Secretary Sun quickly agreed. When Su Zhou walked out of the hospital, snowflakes were falling in a flurry. She shrank her neck into her down jacket, feeling the snow accumulating on her eyelashes and hair, the wound on her forehead stinging painfully from the cold. She had always hated the cold, and at this moment, the icy wind, mixed with snow, seemed to pierce right into her bones. The snow had come suddenly, with hurried pedestrians rushing by, while the vehicles moved like snails in slow traffic. After a long time of trying to hail a taxi, she found either none were available or they were all full. Eventually, just when she felt she might freeze solid, a bus finally pulled up unsteadily. People waiting around her surged forward, and Su Zhou was almost pushed to the door. The warm air inside, tinged with a mix of various scents from the tightly packed crowd, hit her face, causing a wave of nausea to rise up instantly. With a pale face, Su Zhou quickly squeezed herself out through a gap, leaning against the bus stop while she retched painfully. The passers-by looked at her with disgust. She slumped down weakly against the bus stop, her hands and feet feeling numb. Snow covered her head and face, and her stomach churned violently. She didn't understand why she felt so cold, cold enough that even her heart seemed to tremble. In pain, she shut her eyes. She didn't know how long it had been. She even felt she wasn't so cold anymore. Su Zhou stared blankly at the little angel statue in front of the obstetrics hospital, her eyes void of any warmth. Suddenly, she snapped back to reality, her child. She quickly reached for her phone to call Zheng Li to pick her up. But when she fished around, her hand found nothing. Stunned, she looked down and realized the pocket of her down jacket had been neatly ripped open while she was squeezing onto the bus. All the down had escaped, and her phone was long gone. Su Zhou stared blankly at the empty pocket for a long time, tears finally welling up in her eyes. She tightly covered her mouth, as if afraid to let any sound escape, letting the cold tears mix with the falling snow and seep down her neck. She cried for a long time, until there were no tears left. In a daze, she thought, why was she crying? Was it because she felt sorry for herself? No, it wasn't. Suddenly, she felt that she had never truly entered his world. Zhengwu's college years could only be described as stirring up a storm. With his outstanding looks and an air of aloofness, combined with the mysterious Zheng family background and an enviable GPA, he had become the ideal lover template for countless girls. Many girls at the school pursued him, yet Zhengwu remained a solitary figure, with no girl ever fortunate enough to walk beside him. Until senior year. On a snowy day like this, Su Zhou had just fed herself a piece of sweet and sour pork in the cafeteria, closing her eyes in bliss. When she opened her eyes, she was startled to see the legendary Zheng Wu looking at her with a smile. Blood rushed to her face in an instant, and in her panic, a piece of pork got stuck in her throat. She coughed violently, her face turning purple. A rich laughter rang out above her, and she felt so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. Zheng Wu was practically a god to all the girls in the school. How could she be any different? Yet seeing him in person was even more impressive than the photos. Up close, he was even more breathtaking. Her mind buzzed. Su Zhou. Su Zhou, you fool. Why are you daydreaming at a time like this? The awkwardness lingered for a while before she secretly glanced around. Seeing no one, she steeled herself, her expression stiff, and managed to look up, her tongue stumbling over words. As senior, hello? Zheng Wu appeared unfazed, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Can I sit here? Cough, cough, cough. Su Zhou choked again in surprise. Of course you can." She nodded vigorously, almost breaking her neck in the process to show her sincerity. Zhengwu's unprecedented action made Su Zhou an instant sensation at school. She finally understood what it meant to be famous for someone else's reputation, as everywhere she went, she was tagged as Zhengwu's girlfriend, inevitably stirring up jealousy and resentment. But Zhengwu remained indifferent, continuing to live his life, scattering affection like confetti, inciting public discontent. Yet, Su Zhou clearly remembered that he never confessed his feelings, because Zhengwu had always had a firm grasp on her heart. When she graduated, Zhengwu had already risen from the grassroots of the Zheng family to a managerial position, with an office of his own, a large desk, and behind the Venetian blinds lay the currents of the city's elite. The youthful naivete faded, replaced by a calm and composed demeanor. Just a month after graduation, they registered their marriage, and she moved into the villa under Zhengwu's name. There was still no proposal. She remembered how Zhengwu, with a smile, pulled out a velvet box from his suit, casually took out a diamond ring, and gently placed it on her ring finger, kissing her forehead softly. "This afternoon, we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau." His tone was tender, but left no room for argument. But he didn't know that the diamond was too large, causing the ring to always tilt to one side. 3 years into their marriage, Zhengwu spent very few days at home. He was always busy. It wasn't that he didn't love her. She could sense his remorse, but that remorse gradually morphed into a slight bitterness, worn down by the long, cold years. Just like the amber he once gifted her, smooth and warm, a light green hue, but inside was a trapped insect struggling millions of years ago, symbolizing solitude through the ages. She didn't even have a job. Later, Zhengwu intervened and took over her favorite cafe, renaming it Zhou Fong, as a birthday gift for her. By that time, Zhengwu had already become a well-known figure, appearing on financial magazines and television interviews. As she made her first latte art, Zhengwu spoke eloquently on the screen about inflation and currency wars, his eyes sparkling. They were in love, but that didn't necessarily mean they were suited for each other. Aside from making him a bowl of soup, she felt she could do nothing else. Whenever Zhengwu had to attend events with a female companion, he would call his cousin Zhengzhen to accompany him, while his daily affairs were handled efficiently by his personal assistant, Secretary Sun. She felt like a pet he kept. If he were to leave her, perhaps he would feel sad for a while, but he would eventually recover and forget. But if she were to leave him, she would be adrift in a vast sea, with the sky collapsing and the earth breaking apart. She gradually understood that she perhaps never truly deserved him. Half a month later, Zhengwu stood in front of the door, taking a few deep breaths before unlocking it. As he opened the door, he froze for several seconds. There were no lights, no aroma of food. The cold air rushed in. With a snap, he turned on the lights. "Su Zhou." The empty house echoed his voice. His heart sank as he quickly rushed to the bedroom. Empty. The bedspread was so neatly arranged that it had no wrinkles, and the daisies on the low table had withered into a clump. He flung open the bathroom door. It was empty too. Panic surged within him as he stormed up to the second floor, dropping his keys, phone, and luggage behind him with a clatter. He pushed open every door forcefully: the guest room, the nursery, the study, the walk-in closet. Su Zhou, Su Zhou, Su Zhou. Until the last room, he still did not see her lovely figure. In that moment, he froze, his mind blissfully blank. But only for a moment. He immediately dialed the number he knew by heart. After 2 beeps, a voice said, "Sorry, the number you have dialed is currently out of service. Please try again later." He was completely at a loss. Zhengwu's brows nearly knitted together as he stepped out through the front door, the cold air hitting him hard. Just then, he saw a roaring black jeep speeding towards him, stopping sharply with a screech. Zheng Lei charged up and grabbed his collar, yelling, "I told you, if you treat her badly, I won't let you off the hook." Zhengwu was already anxious and angry. With Zheng Lei causing a scene, he felt his temper rising. What the hell is wrong with you? He pushed Zheng Lei away and rushed to the car. Zheng Lei grabbed his arm, slamming the car door shut with a bang. Zheng Wu staggered back several steps. He took a deep breath, his face suddenly pale, utterly enraged. Get out of my way! Zheng Lei stood firm, his eyes filled with terrifying anger, but also tinged with pain. It's freezing outside. If anything happens to her as a pregnant woman, I will personally kill you. Zheng Wu's body trembled slightly, nearly unable to steady himself. What did you say? She is pregnant. Zheng Lei was instantly furious and punched Zheng Wu on the jaw. You didn't know? His anger boiled over as he threw another punch at Zheng Wu's stomach. Su Zhou must be blind. With that, he turned and walked away, getting into his car. Don't let me find her first. This time, I won't let go. Zheng Wu stood there, motionless, with a whirlwind of emotions, sadness, anger, joy. A multitude of feelings raced across his face. Suddenly, he turned and jumped into the car, gritting his teeth as he slammed on the gas. The car made a U-turn in the garden, roaring off into the distance. Su Zhou gently ran her fingers along the rim of her coffee cup, smiling as she looked at Zheng Wu. His stubble had grown out, his clothes were crumpled, and his brow was tightly furrowed, giving him a disheveled appearance. Zheng Wu knew that Su Zhou didn't want to go back to her parents' home to worry them. A spark of inspiration had hit him, leading him to drive all the way to Jiangcheng, where he found Su Zhou at a friend's house. Su Zhou. Zheng Wu. They both spoke at the same time. Su Zhou forced a smile, breaking the awkwardness. After a long pause, she finally said, "Let's get a divorce." Zheng Wu trembled violently, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked at her. I didn't leave home. I just needed some time to think, she said, biting her lip with a pained smile. The conclusion is that we aren't suited for each other. Zheng Wu felt a rush of darkness clouding his vision. What happened while I was gone? Su Zhou's expression turned serious. Nothing happened. It's just that I'm not good enough for you. Zheng Wu was bewildered, his anger flaring up. Who said that? Su Zhou lowered her gaze, remaining silent. The air fell into a heavy silence. Zheng Wu softened his tone. It's normal to have some unusual emotions during pregnancy. It's okay. Let's go home and take it slow. Thick frost coated the glass window, and Su Zhou looked up, her voice ethereal. I used up almost all my luck to become your bride. She paused, her voice choking up. But I am not Cinderella. You should have your own world. You found a lipstick mark on the luggage you brought back from New York, and a wedding ring that you can take off anytime. She pulled a men's ring from her coat pocket and placed it on the glass table. After a moment, she removed the matching ring from her finger and set it beside it. I'm not angry. I just want to give you the freedom you need. She gazed at him sincerely, her expression devoid of any joy or sorrow. Zheng Wu felt a sharp pain in his chest. I thought if I didn't say it, you would understand. He looked at her painfully, then continued. When I was swimming, the ring slipped off. I searched for a long time before I found it in the pool. I was afraid of losing it, so I didn't dare wear it again. I just kept it in my robe pocket. As for the lipstick mark, I have no idea how it got there. It could have been from the banquet. He suddenly paused. You want to divorce me over this? Su Zhou smiled bitterly. I thought if I didn't say it, you would understand. Her smile held infinite sorrow. But now it seems you don't understand. You see, we really aren't suited for each other, or rather, we're no longer suited. For the first time, Zheng Wu felt despair reflected in her expression. I drove for 10 hours straight to get here, and you're telling me you want a divorce? It seemed unbelievable to him how Su Zhou had changed so much in just a month. Divorce? Divorce? The mere thought of it took his breath away. On the way here, he had replayed countless scenarios in his mind, yet he remained clueless about what he had done wrong. I love you, so I don't want to burden you. Su Zhou spoke softly. You deserve a better life. You need someone like Zheng Zhen, who is knowledgeable and can handle herself at a banquet, negotiating effortlessly at the table.
And me?
I don't know anything. I would only drag you down. I can't fit into your world. She paused, taking a breath. I don't want you to regret it. I fear that you will. Her eyes turned red. You will eventually realize that separating is the best thing I can do for you. Su Zhou controlled her tears and smiled brightly. I want a woman like that. Why would I marry Secretary's son? Zheng Wu spoke seriously. I want a wife, not a partner in business. Su Zhou, why would you get stuck in such a narrow mindset? I, Zheng Wu, don't need my woman to be in the limelight. I can provide for her so she can live a comfortable life, free from worldly troubles. Zheng Wu nearly begged. Su Zhou, come back with me. I've been too busy to consider your feelings. That's my fault. But please don't leave me. Su Zhou's tears spilled over. Zheng Wu, this is for your own good. She staggered to her feet, grabbed her handbag, and left, her tears blurring her vision as the door to the cafe seemed to grow distant. Su Zhou, listen to me. Zheng Wu's voice chased after her, hoarse and desperate. With a loud thud, followed by gasps from the crowd, Su Zhou turned back in a panic. Zheng Wu collapsed to the ground, one leg pinned beneath the fallen coffee table, a scene of chaos surrounding him. Zheng Wu, what happened? Su Zhou rushed back, falling to her knees beside him. Zheng Wu's handsome face was pale, but he managed a strained smile. I'm fine. I just tripped. He pushed her back gently. The cup broke. Be careful not to get hurt. Su Zhou gasped in horror as she grabbed his hand, which was bleeding profusely, several shards of porcelain still embedded in his palm. Take care of yourself, she cried, her voice trembling with anguish. Staff members rushed over to right the table and help Zheng Wu up. It seemed he was seriously hurt, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Just then, the wind chimes at the cafe door jingled, and a man strode in confidently. As he approached, it turned out to be Zheng Li. Zheng Li slammed a file bag down onto the table. Zheng Lao-san, you're such a closed-off person. Zheng Wu sensed something was wrong and quickly said, we can talk about it when we get home. Zheng Li kicked the table angrily. By the time you're fixed, it'll be too late. With that, he went to grab Zheng Wu by the leg. Zheng Wu quickly dodged, but with injuries on his hands and legs, he was no match for Zheng Li. Zheng Li gripped Zheng Wu's ankle tightly, yanking down his pant leg to the knee. Su Zhou looked over, horrified. His entire lower leg was tightly wrapped in plaster and splints, and to make it easier to wear shoes, his foot was left unbandaged. After much struggle, his ankle had swollen grotesquely, and his foot appeared an eerie purple due to being trapped in his shoe. Zheng Li was fuming. San saw. This is what your husband went through on his trip to Melbourne. Zheng Li. Zheng Wu's face darkened as he scolded him. Su Zhou pieced together the situation, her anger flaring. Have you lost your mind driving for 10 hours? She finally understood why Zheng Wu, usually so agile, had accidentally fallen when he tried to chase her. After such a serious injury, how much pain must that fall have caused? The corner of the coffee table must have hurt even more. As she thought of this, her tears fell like rain. Zheng Wu looked at her with concern. Su Zhou's tears fell fiercely, and he glared at Zheng Li. This is your doing. Grandpa almost hit Zheng Wu with his cane. With a fractured fibula in his right leg, he had driven for over 10 hours without rest and was then injured by a heavy object. With his left hand wounded by shattered glass, he was now wrapped up like a dumpling. His spirit, however, was quite good, grinning as he looked at the beautiful woman accompanying him. Zheng Quan shot a disapproving glance at his useless grandson, stomped his cane heavily, and turned to Zheng Li. You're coming back with me to face the music. Zheng Li jumped up indignantly. Grandpa, you can't confuse right and wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Zheng Quan made a sound of disapproval, and Zheng Li awkwardly lowered his head, daring not to say another word. He could only pitifully mutter an, "Oh," and hang his head, following his grandfather out. The room fell silent. Zheng Wu pretended to clear his throat, avoiding her gaze. I pulled 3 all-nighters in New York, and I was so eager to come back early. But then I had a car accident on the highway back, fractured. I didn't want to worry you since you're not well and haven't been sleeping, so I lied and said I was going to Melbourne. He carefully studied her expression. I lay in the hospital for 2 weeks, but I couldn't stand it any longer. I wanted to see you so badly that I snuck out of the hospital. I really didn't mean to drive for that long. You disappeared on me, and I was frantic. Plus, when I found out you were pregnant, I felt both happy and scared, so I didn't think too much. Suzhou looked at Zhengwu's cautious expression, feeling a wave of discomfort in her heart. He, who usually commanded every situation, was now trembling with uncertainty. Suzhou opened her mouth but didn't know where to begin. "Don't say anything." Zhengwu hurriedly interrupted her. "You're going to hurt my feelings again." After a long silence, he spoke softly. "Suzhou, you say you're not worthy of me, but you don't know that in my heart, I've always felt I'm not worthy of you. You don't know how much effort I put into casually running into you in the cafeteria. I saw you sitting by the window so many times, and I took forever to muster the courage to approach you. I worked up the courage countless times, but I always thought I looked ugly today and didn't dare to go over. I delayed for more than half a year until Zhengli told me he liked a girl from the Economics Institute named Suzhou. There were several guys who liked you too, and they planned to compete fairly. I panicked and skipped the last class to go to the cafeteria. You don't know how nervous I was. It was the first time in my life I felt my heart was about to leap into my throat." Suzhou felt as if struck by lightning but tried her best to keep her expression calm, hiding the storm raging within her. Zhengwu continued. "At that time, people said my life had been too smooth, that I had used up all my luck. Zhengli joked that I needed to suffer setbacks with women, to experience hardship. I was genuinely afraid that would come true, so I carefully chose every word when talking to you. Almost all my efforts in life went into that. I didn't dare to confess, not even to propose. I, who feared nothing, finally knew what it was to be afraid. I pretended everything would happen naturally, but you didn't know. You were my Achilles heel. If you had rejected me then, I would have been utterly hopeless." After saying all this, Zhengwu sighed in relief. He had practically laid himself bare before her, which made him feel embarrassed and unprecedentedly lost. Suzhou looked steadily at him as he finished speaking, tears gliding down her cheeks. The two stared at each other for a long time, the sunlight streaming in through the window casting a golden halo around her hair, making her appear even more unreal. So unreal, Zhengwu frowned, wanting to reach out to her. Suzhou stood up and turned to walk out the door. Zhengwu's heart shattered. "Suzhou, don't go." Was she really going to leave him? She turned back, and time seemed to freeze for a moment. After a long while, suddenly, she smiled. And to Zhengwu, it felt like an angel had descended. "I'll go make you a bowl of soup." With that, she smiled again, her laughter reaching her eyes. In an instant, the room was filled with brilliance, and everything felt fresh and vibrant. Zhengwu watched her leave, then flopped back onto the bed, a big smile stretching across his face. This must be love. Despite regrets, there's no wish to regret, and though there's fear, it's not enough to deter. So nice.